The shoes were already boxed. Kwon Sang-yeol was already reaching for his wallet. In 9 days, this fitting would be for a wedding that was supposed to end a decade-long rivalry between two families. He never got the chance to think about that again, because the second he stepped out of the boutique, the street stopped making sense. Across the road, in the amber wash of a shopfront window, a woman was laughing. Not politely, not carefully. The kind of laugh that came from somewhere real, her head tilted back, a small boy wrapped around her hip, his arms locked tight around her neck. Kwon Sang-yeol, 36 years old. The kind of man whose silence could empty a boardroom in under a second. He forgot how to breathe. Janice. Her name arrived in his throat before he decided to let it. 7 years. He had built an empire on top of the hole she left. It took 4 seconds on a sidewalk to crack it back open. His driver, 2 paces behind, followed his stare and went very quiet. The boy turned his head, just slightly, just enough. Because those weren't a stranger's eyes looking back. They were his, sharp at the corners, calculating something before it had even been asked. The exact eyes his own mother once said made him look like trouble waiting on a decision. The shoebox slipped from his hand and hit the marble floor. "Sir," his driver started. Sang-yeol wasn't listening. He was already walking. "Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you're ready for this story, smash that like button before we go any further." 7 years fell away the moment his shoes hit the pavement, and Sang-yeol was 29 again, standing in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor, watching a woman refuse to sign his name off a piece of paper. He remembered the date because it was the first time in his adult life someone had told him no and meant it. The Kwon shipping division had a compliance problem, and the family had flown in an outside auditor because the board no longer trusted the internal one. A man who'd been signing off on Sang-yeol's numbers for 6 years without reading past the first page. Janice Stevens walked into that room in a charcoal suit with her hair pulled back so tight it looked like a decision, set her laptop down without asking permission, and told the room that 14 of the last 20 manifests didn't match the customs declarations. Nobody in that building spoke to Sang-yeol like that. Not his father's lieutenants, not the men twice his age who'd built the empire he was set to inherit, not even his own mother most days. People arranged themselves around him the way furniture arranges itself around a fireplace, careful, respectful, keeping their distance from the heat. Janice looked at him like he was a line item. "These numbers don't reconcile," she said, sliding a folder across the table without softening her voice for his title. "Either your logistics team is incompetent or somebody's cooking the books, and either way, I'm not putting my signature on it." Every man in that room turned to see how Sang-yeol would answer that. He almost laughed. He hadn't laughed in that building in longer than he could remember. "Fix it," he told his logistics director, not taking his eyes off her, "and get her whatever she needs." That was supposed to be the end of it. A 3-week audit, a correction, a signature, a stranger flying back out of his life the way consultants always did. But Janice Stevens kept finding reasons to come back to his floor. She'd catch discrepancies nobody else had the nerve to flag, walk into his office unannounced, drop a spreadsheet on his desk, and wait, arms crossed, unhurried, while he read through it. She never sat down until he asked her to. She never called him sir. She called him Sang-yeol, flat and plain, like it was just a name and not a weight the whole city genuflected to. He found himself clearing his schedule for her visits. It was a Tuesday in October when he finally asked her to dinner, and she looked at him for a long moment like she was running the numbers on the invitation the same way she ran numbers on everything else. "This isn't a good idea," she said. "I know," he answered. She came anyway. They didn't go anywhere his name would open doors. She picked a small place in Itaewon with mismatched chairs and a menu written in chalk, and for the first time in longer than he could count, nobody stood when he walked in. Nobody's eyes dropped to the floor. He ordered for himself. He carried his own tray. Janice watched him do these small, unremarkable things with an expression he couldn't read yet, and it would be months before he understood that expression was her deciding whether the man underneath the empire was worth the risk of caring about. "You don't know how to be ordinary," she told him that night, not unkindly. "Somebody's going to have to teach you." "Are you offering?" "I'm an auditor. I don't offer, I observe and report." But she smiled when she said it, the first real smile he'd seen cross her face, and something in his chest, some room that had been locked since he was a boy watching his father teach him which men to fear and which to use, quietly came unlatched. Over the following months, in stairwells and back booths and the front seat of her rented car, he learned things about her that had nothing to do with logistics manifests. That she'd grown up in Detroit with a mother who cleaned office buildings at night and a grandmother who used to say a woman's dignity was the only inheritance nobody could repossess. That she'd put herself through business school doing exactly this, walking into rooms full of powerful men and telling them the truth they didn't want to hear because somebody in her family had finally earned the right to be listened to. That she didn't trust easily, and she told him so, plainly, the way she told him everything. "I've watched what men like you do to women who trust them," she said one night, her voice low, guarded in a way that made him ache a little. "I'm not interested in being a chapter in somebody's story. I need to know if you're capable of being honest with me, actually honest, not palace honest." He didn't answer with words. He answered by telling her, for the first time to anyone outside his blood, what his father actually did in the rooms beneath the shipping company, the debts collected in blood instead of currency, the men who disappeared when the ledgers didn't balance, the inheritance he'd been groomed since childhood to accept without question. He told her because she'd asked, and because some unfamiliar instinct in him understood that a woman who audited manifests for a living would smell a lie before it finished leaving his mouth. She didn't run. She sat across from him in the dark, quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Thank you for not lying to me." And something about the steadiness in her voice made him understand, with a certainty that frightened him, that he had never once in his life felt safe with another person until this moment, sitting across a table from a woman who owed him nothing and had decided to stay anyway. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, laughing quietly beside her in that dim, chalk-scented restaurant with his guard down for the first time in a decade, was that on the other side of the city, in an office 2 floors above his own, his cousin Cho Jinwoo had already opened a file with her name on it, and was 3 weeks away from deciding exactly what it would cost to make her disappear. The file Cho Jinwoo opened that night sat untouched on his desk for 3 weeks, gathering the kind of patience only a man with nothing but time and malice can afford. He'd noticed the change in Sangyal before anyone else did, the way his cousin had started leaving the office at reasonable hours, the way he'd stopped drinking himself numb after the family dinners that reminded him what he was born into, the way, once, Jinwoo had caught him actually smiling at his phone like a man with something worth smiling about. Jinwoo didn't need to see her face to know what she was. He only needed to see what she'd done to Sangyal to understand she was a problem. The Kwon Yoon alliance had been 11 years in the making. 2 shipping empires, 1 merger, a marriage between Sangyal and the Yoon family's only daughter that would fold half of Incheon's port authority into their hands without a single shot fired. Jinwoo had spent a decade positioning himself as the man who'd engineer that alliance, the cousin who delivered what the patriarch wanted when the heir apparent couldn't be bothered to want it for himself. His entire future, his seat at the head of the table. His name on the letterhead sat balanced on Sangyal marrying a stranger he didn't love. He was not about to let some American auditor with a spreadsheet and a spine unravel 11 years of careful architecture. So he did what men like Jinwoo always do. He went looking for the softest place to press. It took less time than he expected. Janice's mother, back in Detroit, had co-signed a small business loan for Janice's uncle 2 years earlier. A modest thing, a barbershop, nothing that should have mattered to anyone outside that family. But debt, Jinwoo had learned long ago, is just another word for leverage if you know which hands to put it in. A phone call to a contact at a Seoul-based holding company with quiet ties to an American lending firm, a manufactured default notice, a threat of a lawsuit that could take the barbershop, the house behind it, and whatever savings a woman who'd cleaned office buildings her whole life had managed to set aside. All of it took Jinwoo 11 days and less effort than picking out a tie. The photographs took longer, but not much. A photo editor Jinwoo kept on retainer for exactly this kind of work spent a week compositing Sang-yeol into a series of images with Min-ah-yoon. His hand at her waist at a gala neither man had attended together, his head bent toward hers at a rooftop bar in Gangnam, intimate enough to break a heart, vague enough that no lawyer could ever prove they were fabricated. He had them delivered to Janice's apartment in a plain envelope, no note, no signature. He didn't need one. The photographs would speak the language grief always speaks, the sudden, sick certainty that you were foolish enough to believe someone chose you. What Jinwoo didn't know, what he had no reason to ask, was that Janice had found out 4 days earlier that she was pregnant. She hadn't told Sang-yeol yet. She'd wanted to find the right night, the right words, some quiet corner of their strange, guarded, hard-won happiness to set the news down gently, the way you set down something you're afraid might break. Instead, she opened an envelope alone in her apartment and looked at photographs of the man she loved with another woman's hand woven into his, and something inside her that had survived every hard thing a black woman raised on the west side of Detroit learns to survive, closed like a door. She didn't cry, not at first. Her grandmother hadn't raised her to cry first. She got very still, the way she used to get still in boardrooms right before she told a man twice her age exactly how his numbers didn't add up, and she started making calls. The lawyer representing the holding company confirmed the loan default was real, the lawsuit was real, and unless the debt was settled in full within 30 days, her uncle's barbershop and her mother's house would both be seized. The lawyer used careful, bloodless language, the kind men use when they already know the outcome and are only there to deliver it politely. Janice asked, twice, who had purchased the debt. Both times, she was told that information wasn't available to her. She didn't need it spelled out. She understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who'd spent her career reading between the lines of falsified paperwork, exactly what kind of message this was, and exactly who had the money and the motive to send it. She tried calling Sang-yeol once. Her hand hovered over his name for a long time. And then she thought about the photograph, his hand at that woman's waist, his head bowed toward her, so easy, so familiar, and she thought about her mother's house, and her uncle's shop, and the small, unformed life beginning inside her that had no father's name attached to it yet, and no protection from a family capable of reaching across an ocean to punish a woman for loving the wrong man's son. She thought about her grandmother's voice, the one that never left her. A woman's dignity is the only inheritance nobody can repossess. Janice packed 2 suitcases, wired what savings she had to settle the loan before it destroyed her family, and was on a flight out of Incheon before the sun came up, before Sang-yeol had even woken to find her number disconnected, her apartment empty, her name scrubbed from every project she'd touched. As if a woman who had once made an empire answer for its lies had never set foot in that building at all. He would spend the next 7 years believing she left because she stopped loving him. He would never know, not for one single day of those 7 years, that she left carrying the one piece of him she refused to let anyone take. 7 years of not knowing collapsed into 7 seconds, the moment Sang-yeol closed the distance across that boutique floor, and Janice Stevens turned to face him with a boy's small hand wrapped safely inside her own. Janice. Her name came out of him rough, unrehearsed, nothing like the composed voice that ran a shipping empire. For one unguarded instant, something moved behind her eyes, recognition, maybe grief, maybe both, and then it was gone, sealed shut so fast he might have imagined it. Mr. Kwon, her voice was even, measured. The same voice she'd once used to tell him his manifests didn't reconcile, except now there was no warmth underneath it, nothing left of the woman who used to say his name like it belonged to her too. It's been a long time. 7 years. He couldn't stop looking at the boy, couldn't stop cataloging the small, devastating details, the set of his jaw, the way he studied Sang-yeol with the same unblinking calculation Sang-yeol's own mother used to complain about in him as a child. Janice, who is? This is Leo. She said it quickly, evenly, the way you close a door before the wind can get through it. My son. Your son? Sangyol's eyes hadn't left the boy's face. How old is he? Mr. Kwon. Her voice dropped, quiet and final, the kind of quiet that carried more warning than any raised voice ever could. I don't owe you my son's age. I don't owe you anything. Janice, look at him. Look at his eyes. I need to go. She tightened her grip on Leo's hand, angled her body between the boy and the man in front of her without seeming to move at all, an instinct so old and so practiced it looked like nothing more than adjusting her purse. It was good running into you. Take care of yourself. You just vanished. The words came out of him before he could stop them, 7 years of a question he'd never had the chance to ask, finally forcing its way out in the middle of a marble-floored shoe boutique. One day you were there, and the next, your number was disconnected, your apartment was empty, nobody at the office would tell me anything. 7 years, Janice. 7 years and not one word. Something flickered across her face, quick, sharp, gone almost before it arrived. For just a moment he saw exactly how much that question had cost her to hear, and exactly how much it was costing her not to answer it honestly. Some things, she said quietly, are better left where they were buried. Not this, not when. He stopped himself, looked at the boy again, and something in his chest went very still, the way it used to go still right before a deal turned dangerous. Not when a child has my mother's eyes. He has his own eyes, Mr. Kwon. Her voice didn't rise, didn't crack, didn't give him a single thing to hold on to. You should get back to your fitting. I understand congratulations are in order. She knew about the wedding. Of course she did. It had been in every business paper in the city for months, the alliance that would fold half of Incheon's port authority into the Kwon family's hands. He watched her say it without a trace of feeling in her voice, and he understood, with a clarity that landed like a blow, that whatever this woman had built for herself in 7 years, she had built it strong enough to say those words to his face and not let a single crack show through. He wanted to reach for her. He didn't. Something about the careful, deliberate distance she kept between her body and his told him that if he crossed it, she would disappear again, faster and further than the last time, and this time he might never find where. Take care, Mr. Kwon, she said, and then she was walking away, Leo's small hand in hers, out through the glass doors and into the Cheongdam-dong afternoon, gone before he could form a single word that might have kept her there. His driver appeared at his shoulder, still holding the fallen shoe box, his voice careful. Sir, you're fitting for the rehearsal. Cancel it. Sir. Cancel the rehearsal. Cancel the fitting. Get me Detective Han on the phone. Sangyol was already moving toward the door, his mind running through 7 years of silence at a speed that felt almost violent. I want a full history. Everything. Where she went when she left Seoul, what flight, what visa, every address she's had since. I want to know how a woman who ran compliance audits for my own company disappeared without a single record trail, and I want to know by tonight. What Sangyol didn't know, standing on that sidewalk with his pulse hammering for the first time in longer than he could remember, was that 4 floors up in a glass office overlooking the same street, Cho Jinwoo's private security system had just flagged an unusual search. A classified records request, run under Sangyol's own executive clearance, querying an old personnel file that had been sealed and buried 7 years earlier under Jinwoo's direct authorization. Jinwoo set down his coffee very slowly and read the alert twice. Somewhere in the building beneath him, an old ghost he'd paid a great deal of money to erase had just resurfaced in broad daylight, and his cousin, the one man in the family capable of unraveling everything Jinwoo had spent a decade building, was already digging. If you believe a mother's love is stronger than any criminal empire ever built, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what Janice does next. And drop a comment below saying justice for Janice, so this director knows exactly how many of us are watching him. The digging Jinwoo feared started that same afternoon, quiet and clinical, 3 streets away from where Janice thought she'd built a life nobody could touch. She noticed the sedan on Tuesday. It was easy to miss the first time. A silver Genesis parked half a block from Leo's school, tinted windows. Nothing about it that should have caught the attention of a woman juggling a lunch bag and a 6-year-old's backpack. But Janice Stevens had spent a career trained to notice what didn't add up, and something about that car sat wrong in her chest the way a falsified manifest used to sit wrong on a spreadsheet, small, almost invisible, and impossible to unsee once she had. It was still there Wednesday. Same spot. Same angle, positioned to watch the front gate without watching it directly. By Thursday, her hands weren't steady when she buckled Leo into the back seat. "Mommy, you're squeezing," Leo said, and she made herself loosen her grip, made herself smile the way she'd practiced smiling through every hard thing since the night she packed 2 suitcases and left everything she loved behind in Seoul the first time. "Sorry, baby, just making sure you're safe." "I'm always safe," he said, with the easy confidence that only a 6-year-old who has never once had reason to doubt it could manage, and something in her chest cracked so quietly he never heard it. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself Seoul was full of black sedans and businessmen and drivers waiting on calls that had nothing to do with her. She had told herself that once before, 7 years ago, right up until the morning a stranger's photographs arrived in a plain envelope and reminded her exactly how fast nothing could become everything. Friday, she picked Leo up 20 minutes early. It didn't matter. The sedan was already there when she arrived, parked closer to the gate than before, and a man she didn't recognize was standing near the fence line at the edge of the playground, dressed like a delivery courier, holding a box with no logo on it, smiling at the children filing out of the building with the kind of practiced warmth that never once reached his eyes. Janice's whole body went cold before her mind caught up to why. She watched him crouch low, at exactly a child's eye level, watched him scan the crowd of small uniforms with a patience that had nothing to do with delivering a package, and she was moving before she finished the thought, cutting across the schoolyard faster than she'd moved in years, her heart slamming against her ribs in a rhythm she recognized from exactly one other moment in her life. Leo. He was already near the fence, already close enough that the man had bent down and said something to him, something that made her son tilt his head the trusting, curious way children do when a stranger seems kind. "Leo, come here now." Her voice cracked the schoolyard air in a way that made 3 teachers turn. Leo looked up, confused, took a step toward her, and the man's hand moved, fast, reaching for his shoulder in a motion that had nothing kind in it at all. That was the exact moment 2 black SUVs tore around the corner and screeched to a stop at the curb, and 4 men in dark suits were out of the vehicles before the tires finished settling, moving with the kind of trained precision that told Janice, even through her panic, that these were not more men sent to hurt her son. These were men sent to stop the ones who were. The fixer at the fence took one look at the SUVs and ran, dropping the empty box, disappearing down a side street before anyone could reach him. One of the suited men gave chase. The other 3 fanned out around Leo in a loose, protective circle, and Janice reached her son at the same moment Sang-yeol stepped out of the second SUV. His face carved from something between fury and terror she had never once seen on him, not in 7 years, not even the night she told him the truth about his own family's business. "Janice," he was breathing hard like he'd run the whole way instead of ridden. "Are you both?" "Get away from us." She had Leo pulled tight against her body, her arms wrapped around him the way they'd been wrapped around him since the day he was born, and her voice shook with something that wasn't just fear anymore. "You did this. Whatever this is, you brought this here." "I didn't do this." His voice cracked, raw and unguarded in a way she'd only heard once before, years ago, in a dim restaurant with mismatched chairs. "Janice, I swear to you I didn't do this. But someone did, and I think I know why, and I have spent every hour since Tuesday trying to figure out how deep it goes." "Since Tuesday," her blood went cold. "You've had people watching us since Tuesday." "I've had people protecting you since Tuesday," he said, "because the moment I ran your name through the archive, someone flagged it, and I need you to understand that whoever is doing this has resources inside my own family's system. I never stopped looking for you, Janice, not once in 7 years. And I am not about to lose you again, not when I finally understand what I lost the first time." Her arms tightened around Leo, her mind spinning through 7 years of careful, hard-won safety unraveling in the space of a single Friday afternoon. And beneath the fear, beneath the fury, something older and steadier began to surface. The same instinct that once made her tell a room full of powerful men their numbers didn't add up. The same instinct her grandmother had planted in her decades before any of this began. She was done running. But as she looked past Sang-yeol's shoulder, toward the empty spot where the sedan had been parked all week, a new and colder question took root in her chest. One that would follow her long after the SUVs pulled away and the schoolyard emptied out. If whoever sent that man to the fence had access to Sang-yeol's own security system, deep enough to track her for days without detection, then the real danger to her son wasn't hiding in a parked car on a quiet street. It was already standing somewhere, inside the Kwon family's walls. "I'm not hiding in one of your safe houses." Janice said it while standing in the middle of Sang-yeol's penthouse living room 2 hours after the schoolyard, Leo asleep in the guest bedroom down the hall under the watch of a guard. She'd personally interviewed herself, and her voice left no room for negotiation. "I spent 7 years building a life where nobody could put me somewhere I didn't choose to be. I'm not starting that over now because your family has a rat somewhere in its walls." "Janice, it's not safe." "Nothing has been safe since the day I met you." She wasn't cruel when she said it, just exhausted, just plain in the way she'd always been plain with him. "So I'm not going to sit in a house with strangers guarding a door. I'm going to find out who's doing this, and I'm going to do it myself." He watched something settle over her then, the same shift he remembered from 7 years ago, the moment she stopped being a woman absorbing a blow and became a woman deciding what to do about it. She walked past him toward the private terminal in his study, the one connected to the encrypted servers his family used for the parts of the business that never touched daylight, and sat down in front of it like she'd been waiting 7 years for the invitation. "I need access," she said. "All of it. Every account tied to the Alliance funds, every server touching the archive that flagged my name. If someone inside your family has resources deep enough to track me for days without your security noticing, that access left a trail. Everything leaves a trail. People who think they're careful are usually the ones who get caught, because careful people stop double-checking their own work." Sang-yeol hesitated only a moment before he pulled up a chair beside her and gave her the credentials. What followed was not fast, and it was not dramatic in the way the movies made hacking look. It was slow, meticulous, unglamorous work. The same unglamorous work she'd once done in a glass conference room 7 years earlier, matching manifests against customs declarations line by line until the lie revealed itself. She built spreadsheets. She cross-referenced timestamps. She traced login patterns across servers that weren't supposed to talk to each other, hour after hour. While Sang-yeol brought her coffee she barely touched and watched her work with something close to reverence. Somewhere around midnight, she found the first thread. "Here," her voice was quiet, controlled, the way it got right before she delivered news that would change a room. 7 years ago, a payment routed through 3 shell accounts before it lands in a personal account registered to a photo retoucher in Hongdae. 40 million won, 2 days before the photographs of you and Mina Yoon were delivered to my apartment. Sang-yeol went very still. "Show me." She pulled up the account trail, and there it was, laid bare on the screen the way the truth always eventually is if someone patient enough goes looking for it. A payment authorized under an executive clearance code that traced. Through 4 layers of obfuscation, Janice unraveled with the same calm precision she once used to catch a shipping manifest lying about its own cargo, back to Cho Jinwoo. "He paid for the photographs," Sang-yeol said, and his voice had gone somewhere flat and cold she'd never heard from him before. "He forged them himself." "That's not all." Janice's fingers moved faster now, chasing the thread further, deeper into the architecture of the family's alliance accounts, and what she found there made even her go quiet for a long moment. "Sang-yeol, look at this." She turned the screen toward him. Years of transactions, small enough individually to escape notice, buried inside legitimate alliance fund transfers, all of them rerouted through the same shell structure, all of them ending in accounts that traced back, through paperwork so carefully laundered it would have taken someone with her exact training years to find it, to Cho Jinwoo. "He's been embezzling from the Alliance funds for years," she said. "Millions. Under your father's nose, under yours. He didn't just take me away from you to protect the Yoon marriage. He took me away because I was the one person in this company who might have eventually caught what he was doing to the books. I got too close 7 years ago, Sang-yeol. Not to your heart, to his money." For a long moment, Sang-yeol said nothing at all. He sat in the dim light of his own study, looking at 7 years of his life rearranging itself in front of him. The wedding he never wanted, the woman he never stopped loving, the son he never knew existed, all of it engineered by a man who had sat across from him at family dinners for a decade, calling him cousin. "He didn't just take you from me," Sang-yeol said finally, quietly. "He built my entire life around a lie to protect his theft. Every year I spent believing you left because you stopped loving me, he built that grief on purpose." Janice reached over, without fully deciding to, and put her hand over his on the desk. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily in 7 years, and neither of them moved for a long moment. "Now we know what he did," she said, steady, certain, the same voice that once told a room full of powerful men their numbers didn't add up. "The question is whether we can prove it loud enough and fast enough that he can't buy his way out of it." Sang-yeol looked at the screen, at the trail of a decade of betrayal laid bare in black and white, and something in his expression hardened into a resolve she hadn't seen in him since the day he told his cousin, in a room full of men twice his age, to fix the numbers or get out. "He holds half the syndicate patriarchs in his pocket," he said. "If we come at him quietly, he'll bury this before morning." "Then we don't come at him quietly," Janice said. "We come at him in front of every single one of them." If you're loving watching Janice take this man down with nothing but skill, patience, and pure intellect, hit that share button and send this to somebody who needs to see a woman win for once. Subscribe to the channel so you're here when she walks into that boardroom. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. They came at him in front of every single one of them, exactly as Janice promised, walking into the 40th floor boardroom 9 hours later, while Cho Jinwoo stood at the head of the table with a champagne glass in his hand, and a decade of careful theft about to be sealed shut forever. The room was full when the doors opened, 6 syndicate patriarchs, men who controlled ports and shipping lanes across 3 countries, gathered around a table stacked with the final merger documents, the alliance between the Kwon and Yoon families waiting on nothing now but signatures and a toast. Jinwoo was mid-sentence, something gracious and rehearsed about legacy and partnership, when the doors swung open and Sang-yeol walked in with a woman none of them recognized at his side. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something has gone badly wrong, and everyone in it can feel it before they understand why. "Sang-yeol," Jinwoo set his glass down with the careful, unhurried movement of a man who had spent a decade learning to keep his hands steady no matter what was happening beneath the surface. "You're early. And you brought—" His eyes flicked to Janice, cool and dismissive, cataloging her the way he'd learned to catalog anyone who wasn't useful to him, a guest. "This meeting is closed to outside personnel," said one of the patriarchs, an older man near the head of the table, without looking up from his copy of the merger agreement. "Whoever this is, she'll need to wait outside." "She's not waiting outside." Sang-yeol's voice carried across the room with a weight none of them had heard from him before, not in boardrooms, not at family dinners. Not once in the decade most of them had watched him grow from a sullen air into a man who preferred silence to argument. "She's the reason this meeting isn't closing the way you think it is." Jinwoo's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "Sang-yeol, I understand this is an emotional day, given the timing of the wedding, but this is not the venue for." "There is no wedding." Sang-yeol let that land, watched it ripple across 6 faces that had a great deal of money riding on the opposite being true, and then turned to Janice with something almost like reverence. "The floor is yours." Janice Stevens walked to the front of that room the way she'd once walked into a conference room 7 years earlier, unhurried, unbothered by the weight of every eye in the building turning toward her. A woman who had learned a long time ago that dignity was not something you asked permission to carry. "Who exactly is she?" one of the younger patriarchs asked, not bothering to lower his voice, the kind of dismissal Janice had absorbed and outlasted for her entire career. "An assistant." "I'm a forensic compliance auditor," Janice said, calm, unhurried, setting a small drive down on the console at the front of the room. "I spent 6 years auditing this company's logistics division, and in the last 24 hours I've audited something else." She connected the drive. The wall of screens behind her flickered, and the merger documents everyone had gathered to celebrate were replaced by something else entirely. Rows of transaction logs, timestamps, account numbers, a decade of quietly rerouted money laid bare in the unforgiving clarity of raw data. Jinwoo's jaw tightened. It was the first crack any of them had seen in him all morning, and it lasted less than a second before he smoothed it back into place. But Janice had spent a career reading the small tailies of powerful men trying to hide something, and she'd seen it. "These accounts," she said, projecting each line as she spoke, "represent $41 million diverted from this family's alliance funds over the last 7 years, laundered through shell structures in Macau and Hong Kong, and deposited into personal accounts registered under aliases tied directly back to director Cho Jinwoo." A murmur moved through the patriarchs, low and uneasy. "This is absurd," Jinwoo said, his voice sharpening now, the polish beginning to thin. "Fabricated. This woman has no standing in this company, no authorization to access these records. And clearly some kind of personal grievance she's decided to air in front of grown men conducting real business." "The timestamps don't lie, Director." Janice pulled up a second file, and this one made the room go colder than the first. "Neither does this, a $40 million payment authorized under your executive clearance code, routed to a photo retoucher in Hongdae, dated 2 days before a set of fabricated photographs were used to end my relationship with Sangyal 7 years ago. You didn't just steal from this family's alliance funds, Director. You destroyed a woman's life and a man's future to make sure nobody ever looked closely enough to catch you doing it." The room had gone utterly silent now. 6 of the most powerful men in Korean shipping staring at a wall of evidence they had no framework to dismiss. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, one new and uneasy thought moved through the room like smoke. If Jinwoo had been quietly bleeding the alliance funds for 7 years without a single patriarch noticing, what else had passed beneath their attention while they trusted the wrong man with the books? "You have no proof any of this connects to me personally," Jinwoo said, but his voice had lost its footing now, each word landing thinner than the last. "Account numbers, aliases, this is circumstantial and you know it. The forensic accounting firm I consulted overnight disagrees," Janice said. "So will the prosecutor's office, once they see the same files I'm showing you now." Jinwoo's composure finally broke. It happened fast, the mask sliding off all at once, replaced by something raw and dangerous the patriarchs had never once seen from the polished, careful director who'd sat across from them at 100 dinners. His hand moved toward the phone in his jacket, and whatever order he was about to give, whatever men he was about to call into that room, made Sangyal step forward instinctively, putting himself between Jinwoo and the woman standing calmly at the podium, his voice low and lethal in a way none of them had heard from him before. "Don't," Sangyal said. "Whatever you're thinking about doing right now, in front of 6 patriarchs and a room full of witnesses, don't." Jinwoo froze, his hand still hovering near his jacket, his eyes moving across the room, the patriarch staring at him with newly cold suspicion, his cousin standing protectively in front of the one person who could destroy him, and the evidence still glowing on every screen in the room, undeniable and unrelenting. And in that frozen, dangerous silence, something in his expression shifted from panic into something far more desperate. The look of a cornered man calculating exactly how far he was willing to go to make sure this room never left with proof of what he'd done. What Jinwoo calculated took less than 3 seconds, and every one of them would haunt the room for years afterward. "Take her out," he said, low and fast, To the two men stationed near the door, not the family's usual security, Sang-yeol realized with a cold lurch in his chest. But men he'd never seen before, men Jinwoo must have brought in himself, outside the family's chain of command, for exactly a moment like this one. All of it. The drive, the woman, whatever it takes. The two men moved toward the podium, and one of them reached inside his jacket. "Stop!" Jinwoo's voice cracked through the room again, sharper this time, and something in his tone made every patriarch at the table go rigid. "Or I make one phone call, and it won't be about accounts anymore. It'll be about a little boy at an international school with no father's name on his birth certificate and no security detail that can watch him every hour of every day." The room went dead silent. Sang-yeol felt something in his chest turn to ice. "Jinwoo." "You should have let this go, Sang-yeol." Jinwoo's composure was gone completely now, stripped down to something raw and cornered, a man watching a decade of careful theft collapse in real time and reaching for the only weapon he had left. "I built this alliance. I built your future. And you let some auditor from Detroit walk in here and try to take it apart because you couldn't keep your hands off her 7 years ago." "Leave my son out of your mouth." Janice's voice cut through the room, and it was not loud. It was not frantic. It was the same steady, unshakable voice she'd used 7 years ago telling a room full of powerful men their numbers didn't add up. Except now there was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Something forged in 7 years of raising a child alone in a foreign country while looking over her shoulder for exactly this moment. "You've been threatening my family since before he was born. You are not touching him now." "Then give me the drive," Jinwoo said, and his hand finally came free of his jacket, and every person in that room saw what it was holding, and the room that had been tense before became something else entirely. Something that made two of the patriarchs push their chairs back from the table in instinctive animal fear. "Everyone stay calm," Sang-yeol said, moving slowly, carefully, positioning his body in front of Janice without breaking eye contact with his cousin. "Jinwoo, think about what you're doing. There are 6 patriarchs in this room. Whatever happens in the next 30 seconds, they will remember it for the rest of their lives, and so will every prosecutor in this country." "Then it doesn't matter what I do next," Jinwoo said, and something in his eyes had gone somewhere flat and final. The look of a man who understood there was no longer a version of his life that ended well. "Because I'm already finished either way." Janice, standing very still behind Sang-yeol, did not look afraid. She looked, instead, like a woman who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment to arrive, and had already made sure it wouldn't end the way Jinwoo believed it would. "Director," she said, calm and clear enough that every person in the room heard it, "I think there's something you should know before you do anything you can't take back." Jinwoo's eyes flicked to her, wary. "I didn't just show this evidence to a boardroom this morning," she said. "I routed the full forensic file, every account, every timestamp, every forged document, to the Supreme Prosecutor's office at 6 a.m. before Sang-yeol and I ever walked through those doors. Encrypted, time-stamped, and already logged as received. Whatever happens in this room in the next 30 seconds, Director, the evidence is already beyond your reach. You can't burn this. You can't buy this. It's already done." For one long, suspended moment, nothing happened at all. And then, from the hallway beyond the boardroom doors, came the sound every person in that room would remember for years afterward. The sharp, unmistakable rhythm of tactical boots moving fast against the marble floor. The doors chimed open. Federal agents flooded into the room in formation, weapons raised, voices sharp and overlapping, and the 2 men Jinwoo had brought in dropped their weapons to the floor and raised their hands the instant they understood exactly how outmatched they were. The patriarchs scattered back from the table, pale and shaken, watching a decade of alliance politics collapse into handcuffs and federal custody in the space of 90 seconds. Jinwoo didn't move. He stood at the head of the table where he'd been about to toast a merger built on theft and forgery and a woman's stolen life, and he watched agents close in around him with the particular defeated stillness of a man who finally understood there was no version of this ending in his favor. "You'll regret this," he said, to nobody in particular, as they pulled his arms behind his back and the cold click of handcuffs closed around his wrists. "Both of you, This family will never let you forget what you did today. This family, Sang-yeol said quietly, watching his cousin dragged toward the door, should have looked closer a long time ago. That's on all of us, not on her. The agents led Jinwoo out past the stunned patriarchs, past the wall of screens still glowing with 7 years of evidence, and the room exhaled all at once. The kind of exhale that comes only after something dangerous has finally, truly passed. Janice stood very still at the podium for a long moment after the doors closed behind them, her hands finally, quietly beginning to shake now that there was no one left to perform steadiness for, and Sang-yeol turned to her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face since a chalk-scented restaurant in Itaewon 7 years earlier. Something unguarded, something grateful, something that looked, for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, like relief. "It's over," he said. "The threat is over," Janice said quietly, watching the last of the agents disappear down the hallway. But Sang-yeol, a man raised his whole life inside an empire like this one, just watched his own family drag his cousin out in handcuffs. That doesn't undo 7 years. That doesn't automatically make you the kind of man who knows how to love a son he's never met. She looked at him, steady, unflinching, the same dignity that had carried her through every hard thing since the night she left Seoul alone and pregnant and terrified. Justice has finally been served. If you loved watching Janice take that corrupt executive down with nothing but pure intellect and quiet power, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because you are not going to want to miss what happens next. That same steady, unflinching dignity was still with her 3 weeks later, when Sang-yeol showed up at her door without a driver, without a suit, without a single one of the trappings that had followed him his entire life. Janice almost didn't recognize him at first through the peephole. He was standing on her small front step in a plain gray sweater, his hands empty, his shoulders carrying none of the weight he usually walked with, looking less like the man who'd once run an empire and more like someone who'd spent the last 20 minutes working up the nerve to knock. The dissolution of the arranged marriage had made every business paper in Seoul. So had the purge that followed Jinwoo's arrest triggering an internal reckoning that swept out 3 other executives who'd quietly profited from his schemes. The Yoon family withdrawing from the alliance with a speed that told Janice everything she needed to know about how much of that marriage had ever been about affection in the first place. Sang-yeol had spent 3 weeks rebuilding his own company from the inside out, and Janice had spent 3 weeks doing what she'd done every day for the last 7 years, getting Leo to school, keeping her small consulting practice running, tucking her son into bed at night, and telling herself the danger really was over now, slowly, carefully, allowing herself to believe it. She opened the door but didn't step back from it. "Leo's at his friend's house until 6, she said, which wasn't an invitation so much as information, a boundary drawn before he'd said a single word. "I know I'm not here to see him." Sang-yeol's hands stayed at his sides, still deliberately unthreatening. "I'm here to see you, if you'll let me." She studied him for a long moment the way she used to study a set of numbers that didn't quite add up, looking for the catch, the angle, the thing hiding underneath. She didn't find one. What she found instead was something rower than she expected. A man standing on her doorstep with none of the armor he usually wore, waiting to be let in or turned away with the same stillness he must have learned as a boy, watching his father teach him which men to fear. She stepped back and let him in. He sat where she pointed, on the small couch in her small living room, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. It was strange to see him there, folded into a space this ordinary, this unguarded, no marble, no glass, no men in dark suits stationed outside the door. Just a man on a couch that had come from a second-hand store, looking around a home built entirely by a woman who had never once let anyone hand her anything. "I'm not here to ask you to forgive me," he said finally. "I know that's not something I get to ask for. Not after everything, not after 7 years, not after what he did to you, even if I didn't know." "I know you didn't know," Janice said quietly, sitting across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "I've had 3 weeks to go through those files myself. I saw exactly how deep he buried it. I believe you didn't know. Then let me say the thing I actually came to say. He looked at her, and for the first time since the boutique, since the boardroom, since 7 years of silence between them, his composure fully slipped, and underneath it was something she hadn't let herself remember in a long time. The man from the restaurant in Itaewon, the man who used to clear his schedule just to hear her tell him his numbers were wrong. I'm not asking to be his father overnight. I know I don't have a right to that. I know 6 years of birthdays and school plays and every hard, ordinary day you carried alone don't get erased because I finally know the truth. I'm asking for the chance to earn something. Slowly, however long it takes, however small you need it to start. Janice was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the particular steadiness of a woman who had learned, the hard way, exactly what her own boundaries were worth. I need you to hear something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just agree with it to get through this conversation. She held his eyes. I raised that boy by myself in a country that wasn't always kind to a black woman with no husband and no family nearby. I built a life with my own 2 hands when I had every reason in the world to fall apart, and I did not do that so a man could walk back into it and expect gratitude for showing up 7 years late. If you're here for Leo, it has to be about Leo, not about guilt, not about legacy, not about proving something to yourself or your family name. My son does not exist to heal what your cousin broke. I understand that. I don't think you do yet, she said, not unkindly, but I think you might in time if you're willing to actually do the work instead of just wanting the reward. So here's what I'm offering, not forgiveness, not a relationship between us, that's not on the table, and I need you to be clear-eyed about that. What I'm offering is this: you can meet him. As a friend of mine, for now, nothing more until he's ready for more than that. You show up when you say you'll show up. You never, not once, make a promise to that little boy you're not certain you can keep. And you understand that every single step forward is something you earn, not something you're owed. Sang-yeol nodded slowly, and something in his face, some old, guarded thing that had likely been locked since he was a boy taught to fear vulnerability as weakness, came quietly undone. That's more than I hoped for, and more than I deserve if I'm honest. Probably, Janice said, and for the first time since the boutique, something almost like warmth moved across her face. But my grandmother used to say a person doesn't earn grace by deserving it. They earn it by showing up for it every single day without being asked twice. So, show up. He did. Not all at once, not with the grand gestures a man like him might once have reached for. No expensive gifts, no dramatic declarations, nothing that would have made Janice close the door on him for good. He came on Saturdays first, sitting quietly at the edge of a playground while Leo played, letting the boy come to him instead of forcing anything. He learned, slowly, patiently, the particular rhythm of showing up for a child who had every right to be wary of him, remembering which cereal Leo liked, showing up early instead of late, never once promising more than he could deliver. And Janice watched, careful and unhurried, the same way she'd once watched a set of numbers slowly reveal whether or not they could be trusted. As the months passed, and the distance between the man on her doorstep and the boy who bore his exact eyes began, one small Saturday at a time, to close. 2 small Saturdays became 2 years, one slow and patient season at a time, and on a quiet morning in late spring, Janice Stevens stood in front of a mirror in a private garden estate outside Seoul, watching a woman she barely recognized as the one who had once packed 2 suitcases and fled a city in the dark. The gown was cream silk, simple in its cut, accented with a single strand of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, the same grandmother whose voice had carried her through every hard year since, the one who used to say a woman's dignity was the only inheritance nobody could repossess. Janice had thought of that voice often over the last 2 years, watching Sang-yeol learn, patiently and without complaint, exactly how much trust he had to rebuild before he'd earned the right to stand beside her at all. He had never once rushed her. That was the thing she hadn't expected in the beginning, that a man raised inside an empire built on taking whatever it wanted would learn, slowly and deliberately, how to wait for something instead. He'd shown up every Saturday he said he would. He'd sat through Leo's soccer games in the rain without complaint, learned to braid his own patience into something steady enough for a boy who'd spent his whole life without a father to lean on. He'd asked before every step forward and accepted every no she gave him, until the no's became fewer, and then became yes, slowly on her own terms, in her own time. Now Leo stood in the hallway outside her dressing room in a small tailored suit, 8 years old, his face bright with an excitement he'd been carrying for weeks. And when Janice opened the door, he looked up at her the way he'd looked up at her every day of his life, like she was the safest, steadiest thing in the entire world. "You look like a queen, Mom," he said, and something in Janice's chest, some old and guarded place that had been closed since a plain envelope arrived at her apartment door 7 years before this one, finally, fully opened. "Are you ready to walk me down there?" she asked, kneeling slightly to fix his collar, her hands steady in a way they hadn't been in a very long time. "I've been ready," Leo said, with the easy confidence of a boy who had never once, not for a single day of the last 2 years, doubted that this moment was coming. The ceremony was small, private, exactly the way Janice had insisted it be. No press, no patriarchs, no glass towers or marble floors, just a quiet garden lined with white flowers, a handful of people who had earned the right to be there, and a man standing at the end of the aisle in a simple dark suit. No armor, no title, nothing left of the empire he was born into except the steadiness he'd spent 2 years proving he could carry without letting it harden him again. Leo walked her down the aisle with his small hand tucked into hers, his chin lifted, taking the responsibility with the seriousness only a child fully understands. And when he placed her hand into Sangyal's at the end of that aisle, Sangyal knelt down first, before a single vow was spoken to Janice, and looked his son directly in the eye. "I promise you," he said, quiet enough that only the front row could hear it, "that I will never make you a promise I don't keep. Not one, not ever." Leo nodded, solemn, and stepped back to stand beside his mother, and something about that small, unscripted moment undid every guarded corner of the garden watching. Sangyal rose and turned to Janice, and when he spoke his vows, his voice carried none of the polish he'd once used to negotiate empires. It carried instead the plain, unguarded honesty of a man who had spent 2 years learning that love wasn't something you were owed for showing up once. It was something you built, one Saturday, one kept promise, one small act of patience at a time. "You taught me what it means to actually earn something," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not inherit it, not take it, earn it. I will spend the rest of my life making sure that lesson never leaves me." Janice, regal and steady in her grandmother's pearls, looked at the man in front of her and the boy beside her, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, the particular, hard-won piece of a woman who had fought for every inch of the life she was finally standing inside of. Somewhere across the city, in a cell with gray walls and a single narrow window, Cho Jinwoo sat alone, exactly as he had for the last 2 years, forgotten by the syndicate patriarchs who once feared him, stripped of the title and the fortune he'd spent a decade stealing to protect. No garden, no pearls, no small boy calling him anything at all. Just the quiet, permanent consequence of underestimating a woman he'd once dismissed as powerless. A woman whose dignity, it turned out, was never his to take in the first place. Back in the garden, as the sun dipped low over the flowers and Leo laughed at something his father whispered to him, Janice Stevens closed her eyes for just a moment and let herself feel, fully and without guard, the weight of everything she'd carried finally, truly set down. Justice had not just been served. It had been built, brick by patient brick, a family strong enough that nothing could ever tear it apart again. Thank you all so much for watching this story from beginning to end. If Janice's journey moved you the way it moved us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss what we bring you next. And drop a comment below and tell us, what story do you want to see us tell next? We're listening, and we can't wait to bring you another one just like this.